Hey everybody, we're looking for some sponsors. If you're a business owner and you want to support the cause, please contact me at reformgangsters@gmail.com.
Aniello Dellacroce. That was his name. They called him O'Neill. They called him the Pope. They had a couple of nicknames for him. I don't know why they called him O'Neill. It's Irish, but that's what they called him. I mean, but nobody really, when I was in his company, nobody ever called him O'Neill. They always called him Neil. I mean, hi Neil, nobody ever said hi O'Neill, you know what I mean? Like it was always Neil. I never called him Mr. Dellacroce. I always called him Neil. I mean, so, he goes back a long way with my father, really. I mean, he met my father. My father was in his early 20s. So he was in the original regime that my father got brought into. So when my father winded up going with Charlie and winded up getting introduced to that family, the Mangano family, Neil was already a soldier in that family. And he was in a regime with Charlie and Charlie's brother Danny, and that regime the captain was this guy, Tommy Rava. He was the captain, and Albert Anastasia was the boss. So my father met Neil at a very young age. And that crew of wise guys, that crew were Albert's main shooters. Albert Anastasius, they were his main guys. Neil, my father, Charlie, his brother Danny, this guy Frankie Martin, this guy Mike Catalano. There was a whole crew of them, and they were Albert's main guys. They hung out in this Ravenite, like Neil had that club already. That's where they hung out, and Albert used to frequent that club. So, he went back a long way with my father. So I got to explain the relationship my family had with him to understand my relationship with him. So from there, my father got straightened out in 53, and Neil was a soldier in the same regime as my father. So they were soldiers together. Moving forward, when Albert Anastasia was assassinated in 56, they all went on the lam. My father's regime, because they were all being hunted by Carlo Gambino, because they were Albert's main killers, and they were beefing, and they were all went on the lam. And I told that story a few times before, that they were going to try to kill Carlo Gambino in Grand Central Station, but he didn't show up. So what happened was their captain, Tommy Rava, was invited to come to Florida to have a peace conference with Gambino in Florida, and he disappeared. So when he disappeared, that's when my father and Neil and all of them went on the lam, and they were going to kill Gambino, and then Gambino called them all in, and they made up, and he took them back. And at that point, Gambino made Neil the captain. So Neil became my father's captain. He was my father's second captain, because he was intelligent, he was a tough guy, he was a killer, and he had a lot of respect in the city, Neil. He was well-liked, he was, a gangster. He had a lot of respect, he commanded. So, and my father always said that Carlo Gambino was the smartest man he ever met. And Albert Anastasia was the toughest man he ever met. So I guess Carl, being as sharp as he was, knew that the best thing to do to keep the peace and have all these guys on his side was to make Neil the captain, which he did. So Neil became my father's captain. And then later on, as time went on, eventually Neil became Carl's underboss, because that's what kind of guy he was. So from Carl wanting to kill Neil in the 50s to now Neil's the underboss. And then it went from there. And my father, all my life, used to go to see Aniello at the Ravenite every Wednesday afternoon and every Saturday. It was like a religion. He went every Wednesday and he went every Saturday. It was like a routine for my whole life. And Christmas Eve and Thanksgiving, the day before Thanksgiving, and for all the holidays. Christmas Eve, every Christmas Eve he went there. They had a big Christmas party. I'll get to that later on because I started to participate in that. So he had a very, very tight relationship with him. When I got into the street and when I started running around with my father at 16, so when I was 16, my father took me there, and then my father started explaining stuff to me, and he told me about Neil, and I found out, about the situation when they were kids, and when Neil was the underboss, how, the underboss from Chicago came to New York one day to see Carl, and Neil and my father took the underboss to Chicago out for dinner, and he started telling me all the stuff about Neil, about a couple of that he dressed up as a priest once to kill somebody. That's why they started calling him the Pope. He dressed up like a priest and he went out and did a piece of work. I mean, it's documented. They talk about it all the time, and he loved Neil, and I met him, and then I met Neil's son, who I became really, really good friends with, Buddy Dellacroce. I became very, very tight with his son. And so moving forward, now I meet Neil, and they always played pinochle. Neil sat in the back of the Ravenite. There was a round table in the back of the Ravenite, and he always played pinochle. And my father and all of them would sit back there, and they would play pinochle, and they would bet numbers. And there was a number runner in the Ravenite. For those of you who don't know what numbers is, it's the form of the lottery back then. And there would be a number runner there, and they would play for $20, $50, $100 numbers. And they, and that's how they gambled. They used to bet numbers. So if you lost, if there was $20, $50 hand, they played a number, and then if they hit the number for $50, you're talking 25,000. So they whacked it up. You know what I mean? If they hit it for 25,000, and they did hit it a couple of times. So that was the routine. They'd go there, and guys would always come to see Neil. All these wise guys, captains from other families, and that's how I got to know everybody. I got to know all these other people from other families, through being there and being around Neil. And then as I got older, and I started running around New York a lot with his kids, because then I met his daughter, Tony. We became very good friends, Tony and I. Actually got, unfortunately, Tony, a few of her boyfriends got killed. Neil didn't like them. A couple of them got killed. One of them, as a matter of fact, we were supposed to kill this kid, some coke dealer. And Louis Baja, his name was, and we were supposed to kill him because he was hanging out with me, and he wound up getting shot by somebody else. So, but my father took the contract from Neil, and we were going to do it, set him up, and in between the time we set him up and the time he just wound up getting shot anyway. But so that was my relationship with him. I had a couple of run-ins. He bailed me out of a few situations, but he was a gangster. He was the boss. He was the underboss, and unfortunately, when he was very old school, like my father, and they always used to tell me, the boss is the boss is the boss. That was what they told me. Whatever, the boss is the boss is the boss. So when Gambino nominated Paul Castellano to be the boss, Neil had the power and the strength and the crew to just declare himself the boss, to tell Carl, no, that ain't happening. Or even after Carl died, just to step in and declare himself the boss. The captains would have never went against Neil. They would have voted him as the boss. And my father and John Gotti and a lot of that crew, that original crew that I talked about, got very upset with Neil because he didn't take the reins of the family. And the reason why he did it was because Gambino was the boss, and that was his wishes, and Neil respected his wishes because he was the boss. And he didn't take it. And really, my father always just told me he didn't really need it. I mean, he was making crazy money. He didn't need the aggravation. But a lot of guys got upset with him. A lot of guys got upset with him. But that was what he did. But as far as me and him go, he always was good to me. He always liked me. He used to talk to me all the time. You know, he knew I was good friends with his daughter. I used to drive, you know, look out for his daughter. His son loved me, Buddy. You know, unfortunately, Buddy died. Buddy ran away after he died, Neil. He got scared. He ran away. You know, and when I went to prison in 78, you know, he had a party for me. Him and my father had a big going away party for me in the Ravenite. You know, nobody had cameras. You know, it's a shame I have no pictures because it was like a crazy party. It was actually in the Ravenite. It was probably the day before I surrendered. And my father, you know, we got dressed up, suits and ties to the nines, you know, manicures, the whole bit. We went to the Ravenite, my father and his whole crew, me, my father, Tony Lee, my whole crew, all my friends, all my guys with my father. We all went to the Ravenite. You know, we walked in, Neil had a table with all food on it, you know, catered food on it. And like, it was packed with wise guys and captains. And Neil was in the back. I sat down next to Neil. You know, I had a drink. We were drinking espresso together. He had his arm around me. He was schooling me about what to do when I went to prison. You know, like, don't talk to nobody. If anybody mentions our names, you don't say nothing. You check it out with us. And you know, because people are going to mention my name and people are going to mention your father's name, because this was the first time I went to prison. So it was very festive. You know, when I look back on it, like, you know, I was going to jail. I mean, you know, and it was like, they were acting like I was going off to college, man. It was a party, you know, and off I went, you know, and I went away for 2.5 years. And when I got out, and actually I got out of jail. And the next day I got out of jail, I met my father at the Ravenite and to see Neil, to say, you know, I'm out and hello, because while I was in prison, his son Buddy visited me and his cousin Sal, his nephew Sal and Buddy always came to visit me, and his daughter used to write me and everything. So, you know, that was it. Matter of fact, the first mob wedding I ever went to, now that I'm thinking about it, this is a funny story. The first mob wedding I ever went to was his stepdaughter in the Waldorf Astoria. That was the first mob wedding I ever went to. I was about 19 or 20, I don't know. And my father took me to my first mob wedding. It was his stepdaughter. We go to the Waldorf Astoria, and there's 1,000 wise guys there and their kids, because it's his stepdaughter. So now my father, this guy Eddie Dawes, he was a wise guy. This guy Guido, he was a wise guy, and all their kids are there because they knew her, and I knew them because through their fathers. So there was a whole bunch of us. Buddy, Tony, his daughter, Eddie Dawes, his kids, Guido's kids, me, right? So I'm at the wedding, and Eddie Dawes' son tells me, come upstairs, we got a suite, right? So I go upstairs to the suite, and I walk into the suite, and there's all the wise guys' kids in the suite. But, you know, we're all around the same age. You know, we're all in our early 20s. And I walk in, and they're drinking champagne. They got Coke on the table. It was like, oh my God, what's going on here? And now I'm up in the suite with all their kids, and we're drinking champagne, we're blowing Coke, and all our fathers, these fucking mad dog killers, are all downstairs at the wedding, and we're up there having a party in the suite. And when I went down, my father said, where'd you go? Where were you? I said, I was upstairs in the suite with, you know, with Tony and everybody. And he just like looked at me like what? That was my introduction to my first mob wedding. But, you know, he was always good to me. He was good to me. You know, he bailed me out a few times. He got mad at me once over the tabs. I told that story when me and Buddy were signing tabs all over Manhattan. You know, he told me he was going to break my fingers if I signed another tab, you know, but I don't believe he would have done that. I could have probably got away with signing more tabs, but I didn't. So, you know, that was, Buddy was scared to death. And he, you know, his wife lived right, you know, his wife and Buddy lived directly right across the street from the Ravenite. But his girlfriend lived in Staten Island, so he used to commute a lot when he didn't stay on Mulberry Street. But he commanded, you know, respect. You know, when he walked in a room, you know, people respected him. You know, he commanded respect. You know, I had a big incident with the West Side with the Genovese family. when I got out of prison, my father was in Florida then, so it had to be like, I don't know, it was in the early 80s, maybe. It was probably, well, it was before he got arrested. He got arrested in 84, so I would say it was like 82 or 83. So what happened was, I was in the Richie Gotti's club with Tony Lee, and they were playing pinochle, and John Gotti had an appointment with this guy, Dom DeSalo, who was a wise guy with the Chins crew. And he had a club on, the Chins Club was on Sullivan Street. So I knew him. I knew Dom DeSalo through my father. So John had to bring money to him that someone around my father and John owed him money, and they was supposed to bring him money. John had an appointment with him, so they were playing pinochle, and I went, and John looked at me and he says to me, "You know Dom DeSalo, right?" I go, "Yeah, I know Dom DeSalo." He goes, "Do me a favor." He said, "Take this money and go to Sullivan Street and bring him this money." I said, "Well, I don't have my car with me. I came with Tony Lee." So Tony Roach, who was a famous character, if you know anything about John Gotti, you always hear the name Tony Roach mentioned. He was he was crazy, Tony Roach. So he tells Tony Roach, Tony, drive Anthony to Sullivan Street. So me and Tony Roach get in the car. We drive to Sullivan Street. I walk in Sullivan Street, and Dom DeSale is sitting at the table like this with his glasses on his nose like this, and he's looking at receipts, right? And he looks up at me and he says to me, "What are you doing here?" So I looked at him, "What am I doing here?" I said, John Gotti, John sent me." He goes, "Where's John?" I said, "He's busy." He goes, "Busy what, playing pinochle?" I said, so now I lied. I go, "No, he was busy." But he was playing pinochle. So he goes to me, "You can't talk to me. You ain't on my level." I go, "Listen." I said, "Listen, I'm not here to talk about levels. They brought me some money. They told me to bring this money to you. Here's the money. You know, I don't want to hear that pulling rank bullshit." So I give him the money. He counts it. And I don't notice the money's short. Now, I don't know this, right? I don't even know what the figure was. The money's short. He counts the money. He takes his glasses. He goes, "The money's short." And he throws his glasses at me, and they hit me in my chest, and they bounce off onto the table. So I go, "What are you doing?" He jumps up, and he throws the slap at me, and I grab his arm, and I twist it behind his back, and I put him against the wall, and he's going. Tony Roach now starts running to hit him, and I tell Tony Roach, "No," because I know the guy's a wise guy, right? He's old, and I told Tony Roach, "No, don't," right? And he's wiggling, so I tell him, "Dom, listen, if I let you go and you throw a punch at me, we're gonna hurt you." So I let him go, and he starts cursing out, "Get the fuck," and he's screaming. So we leave. We go back to Richie's club, and I walk in, and Jeannie sees me. Goes, "What happened?" I said, "What happened?" I said, "This guy threw a punch at me." Goes, "Doesn't he know who you are?" I go, "Yeah, he knows." He said, "Didn't he know you were Andy's son?" I said, "Of course he knows I'm Andy's son. That's why I went there." So so what do? John Gotti, Tony Lee, and Jeannie Gotti get me, put me in the car, and where do you think they took me? To the Ravenite. Right? I go in the Ravenite. I go in the back, tell Neil the story. I tell Neil the story. Neil tells me, "All right, tell me again." I tell Neil the story again. Now I repeat the story the third time. I go, "Neil, how many times do you want me to repeat the story?" The guy threw a punch at me. Because now this is a big thing. This is another family that's not getting along with Neil, because there was a lot of friction going on with the Chin and all them. So this was a big issue, because I'm a wise guy's son, a well-respected wise guy's son. I'm with them. I'm with Neil. That's our crew. And this guy threw a punch at me. So now it's a lot of shit's going on here, right? So Neil wants to make sure that I'm on point. I go, "Neil, I'm telling you what happened, right?" So now John's screaming, "I'll start a war over this." And he's screaming out of his mind, John Gotti. He's a captain at the time. And he's screaming, "I'm going to start a fucking war over this," right? So now I go outside to smoke a cigarette. And there's this guy outside, this old man that was a black hand guy. This guy was like from the turn of the century. He was like a dinosaur. His name was Mo Chink. He was a wise guy from like the 20s. He's out. He loved my father. This guy loved him. And I got goosebumps when I'm thinking about it. I walk outside, I smoke a cigarette. He walks up to me, he goes to me just like this. He goes, "Do you know where your father is?" I go, "Yeah, he's in Florida." He goes, "Well, listen, go right now to a payphone call your father, tell your father to come to New York immediately. He goes, and I'm telling you right now, don't go in anybody's car. Don't go on any appointments. Don't go anywhere with anybody. And I mean anybody, he tells me. Tony Lee, nobody. He told me, do not go with anybody. I looked at him, you don't have to, I got goosebumps. I said, yeah. I ran around the corner to a payphone. I called up my father. I told him what happened. He ran right to the airport. He got on a flight. He was in New York for 4 hours. He went right to the airport. He got on a flight. He came to New York. Where did we go? To the Ravenite, of course, with Neil. Talked. Then we went from the Ravenite to Sullivan Street, and we sat down with Tony Lee, my father, Dom DeSailor, and the Chin's brother. And the Chin's brother and me. And we sat down at a table, and he lied. Dom DeSailor lied. And my father looked at me and goes, my father said, that's not what happened. So Dom DeSailor goes, what do you mean? That's what, he goes, so Dom DeSailor said, what are you calling me a liar? He goes, no, what are you calling my son a liar? He goes, listen, my son don't lie to me. He goes, he says, he said, my son don't lie to me. Now they're politicking because the Chin's brothers there. My father got up. He said, how much more money do you got coming? So he said the figure. My father took it out of his pocket. He threw it at the table, threw it on the table, and he told Dom DeSailor, if you ever put your hands on my son again, I'm going to put you right through the ground. He told him, I'm going to put you right through the floor. He told John, he goes, you want to politic with this guy? I'm not a politician. I'm a gangster. You see my tie? It's got a stain on it. He said, my father like this. He goes, I'm a gangster. I'm not a politician. He said, let's go. Me and Tim and Tony got up and we left. Where did we go? Back to the Ravenite. We walked in without John and everything. So Neil walked through this. Neil saw my father. He went like this. He put his head down. He shook his head. He said, what happened? My father goes, what happened? I left. I walked out. I threw the money at him. They want to politic. Let them politic. A little while later, John came back. He goes, what's wrong with you? So Neil was involved in a lot of stuff with us, throughout the years, and I went to his funeral. My father was away when I went to his funeral. As a matter of fact, when I went to his funeral, I actually sat on the couch with Frankie Valli and Joe Pesci were there, and I was talking to them because I know Frankie, so they saw me. And Joe Pesci came to Neil's funeral with Frankie Valli. They're both from Jersey, I guess, so it was a Jersey thing, but and that's it. Was at his funeral, and they buried him, and that was it. And then, John became the boss. So I had a lot of interactions with him throughout the years. I spent a lot of time with him. I spent a lot of Christmas Eves with him at the Ravenite, and then we went home and eat fish, but we always started out the day at the Ravenite to see him. And, he liked me. And I liked him.
Did Carlo have him take out Rava?
No, they had nothing to do with that. No, they loved Tommy. No, they had nothing to do with that. No, matter of fact, when he disappeared is when they knew they were in trouble. Like they knew, like now the shit's on. You know what I mean? And no, Tommy Rava was the guy that did the ceremony when my father got made. He was the guy that did the ceremony. He was the captain that performed the ceremony when my father got initiated into the mob, into that family. And Charlie had a bar in Manhattan called the Patch. It was still there. The building's still there. It's right outside. It's right near the 59th Street Bridge. When you come over the 59th Street Bridge, you make a right, and the couple of buildings, there's a brick building, and they had a bar there called the Patch, and Charlie had an apartment upstairs, and that's where my father's ceremony was held. And Neil was there, and Rava was there, and they had the ceremony up there. No, they had none of them had anything to do with it. No, he was their guy. He was Albert's main captain. He did. That's when Carlo Gambino wanted to make peace with them, he called them all into his house in Brooklyn one at a time, including Aniello. And he told my father, which my father told me the whole story, he told my father that he knew that my father was just taking orders because they killed a lot of people. They killed Gambino, they killed a couple of his cousins. He doesn't know who the shooters were, but he knows that crew did it because Albert Anastasia did not like Gambino. was abusing him. According to what my father used to tell me, he used to abuse him, take money off him. And that's why Carl, had him, plotted to have him assassinated. And how smart was Carl? After he had him assassinated, he made the commission make a rule that you couldn't kill a boss without permission of the commission. How smart was he? After he killed the boss, he made the rule that you can't kill a boss without permission. Yeah. Want to talk about treachery? So when Carl called them all in, he gave them the same schmeal that you were soldiers and you took orders and, I want you back. And then what happened was they became his crew. Then my father did work for him. My father did a lot of work for Gambino, a lot. He did a lot of work for Gambino and Neil. Out every day, from the morning until the night. I mean, Neil, the position Neil was in, you just get envelopes. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, he's just, they're meeting once a week with the boss and the consigliere, and they're just whacking up money. I mean, they're just taking down money, and then they got pieces of all kinds of businesses, and people are just bringing them crazy money to get up their ass and, all that, butter them up. I mean, like when, Michael Francis and his family, he was bringing Junior Persico millions a week from the gas scheme. My father told me that they used to meet every week, Neil and Paul Castellano and Joe Gallo, the consigliere, and they used to whack up $75,000, $100,000 a week. But that work ethic was they were out all day. Like our work ethic was we're out all day scheming, committing, like the same. They're like just the same thing I did. I went out in the morning, and my whole day was about money, making money. The next crime, the next scheme, the next shakedown, the next business. They were out all day, every day. And then at night, you chill out. You go for dinner, you go have a few drinks, you go to the Copa. The work ethic was like a legitimate person, they went to the office every day. Like them social clubs, the Ravenite was Neil's office. Like you go to work every day, you have an office. Well, you go there every day, right? Yeah, so so Neil went to the Ravenite every day. My father went to Cafe Liberty every day. My father went to Cafe Liberty every day. John went to the Burger and Fish Club every day. You know what I mean? That was their offices, and that's where they conducted their business. But they were hustlers. Yeah, the West Side, the Genovese family, they plotted, they were beefing all the time. My father even got involved in a couple of beefs, even when Paul, they're beefing all the time. They were plotting to kill Neil. They were following him around. They never liked John Gotti. Even once, when they caught a guy, they saw a wise guy that was with the West Side tailing Neil. And they went to Paul Castellano's house. And my father actually went to Paul Castellano's house with Neil and John Gotti and all of them to tell Paul what was going on, because they were, there was going to be a big beef, a big thing, and then was going to jump off. So yeah, he wasn't getting along with the West Side at all, not at all. That's why I got caught up in that thing with Dom DeSala. That's why it was such a big thing, because they weren't getting along. I don't know the reasons why. I believe it was probably from the little bits and pieces I got, was probably over, the construction schemes and, just a lot of schemes and the drugs, and all that bullshit. He was a mentor to a lot of guys. I don't know if he was like a mentor. He was close to John, he was the underboss. So John, he took John under his wing. He definitely, loved John and as far as mentoring him, I guess you could say that, they were just close. It was a close relationship. He was close to John. He was close to my father. He was close to Nicky Carrazza. He was close to a lot of guys, but did John have a special place with him? Yeah, definitely. Because John had a lot of charisma. They were giving Neil a lot of money, like Neil told John one day he needed a suit. The next thing you know, there's a guy walking in the Ravenite with a rack with 10 suits on it. Like he told John once he needed a TV for the Ravenite. An hour later, there was a big, beautiful TV getting delivered to the Ravenite. You know what I mean? So yeah, you know, it was, but Buddy, his son, always was nervous, always told me we would be in the Ravenite, me and his son, and we'd be sitting there drinking espresso. We were kids, and Neil and John Gotti would be sitting at the back with Neil, and Buddy would tell me, when my father dies, I know this guy's going to kill me. I thought, what are you, crazy? Why you talk like that? Because I'm telling you, when my father dies, this guy's going to get rid of me. He always feared John. For some reason, he always had this fear of John. Because I think there was like a little jealousy with John and him, you know, for Neil's attention. And the proof of the pudding is when Buddy got indicted on one of John's cases, and when Neil died, or no, Buddy got indicted on a case. Buddy was in MCC Manhattan when Neil died. When Neil died and John became the boss, Buddy bailed himself out and went to Neil's house and took all Neil's jewelry. From what I understand, it was over $1 million worth of jewelry, and he went on the lam and he was never to be seen again. And then later on, he died. You know, he had a coke problem. He was drinking a lot, doing a lot of blowing. You know, and he started bleeding internally, from what I heard from his sister and everybody. And he was afraid to go to the hospital because he was a fugitive, and he died in some house in Pennsylvania, in the bed. And he bled out in the house in Pennsylvania. So you know, so as far as him being John's mentor, I guess you could say he was sort of a mentor, but he was a mentor to a lot of guys, a lot of people. But John had a special place with him.
Was he a drinker?
Yeah, he used to go to Jimmy Wetson's. That was his spot. He used to drink. He was a drinker, but they drank, not during the day. During the day, he drank espresso. He played pinochle. But at night, he would go out. He would go to Jimmy Wetson's. That was his spot. It was a piano, like a piano bar joint. Matter of fact, the bartender at the time in Jimmy Wetson's was Bruce Willis, was the bartender. And my mother, it's a funny because my mother and my father would go there and on Saturday, and Neil would be in there with his girl, and they would hang out together and everything. And when Bruce Willis became Bruce Willis, my mother was watching his show one night on TV, and she goes, "Man, Andy, he looks so familiar. Where do we know him from?" And my father goes, "He was the bartender at Jimmy Wetson's. He was the bartender at Jimmy Wetson's." Because that's how he started out in Manhattan, as a bartender. So yeah, that was his spot, Jimmy Wetson's. But they weren't like my father. He drank all over town. These guys were like John drank almost every night, but he drank in the club. Yeah, they were drinkers. That was their generation. They were drinkers.
What did they drink, each of them?
Well, my father, when I was younger, my father drank scotch. Then they started drinking vodka. Neil, I don't really know what he drank because, believe it or not, I never really saw Neil outside of the Ravenite. You know, like once or twice we went to dinner in downtown, and you know, in Little Italy, and they drank wine, of course. But during the day, I saw Neil drink wine. John drank, they drank everything. Martinis were big, scotch, vodka, you know, a lot of Sambuca with 3 beans, and a lot of wine, homemade wine. My father, when I was a kid, on Sundays, my father would take me to these big houses in Brooklyn. I'll never forget. Big houses in Brooklyn. And they all had like grapevines. And it was all these old Italian guys. And we would go there, and they would have speak with broken English with Italian. And they would sit, and my father would sit down at their tables in their yards. Like it was like in the movies. And he would sit there and he would listen to them, and they would like talk low, and he would sit there and he would listen to them, and he would nod his head and everything. And then when we left, they would give him like a gallon of homemade wine, and he would leave with the wine, right? So when I got older and I started knowing the score, I go with him one day to this guy's house, this old timer's house, and he talks. And now I know he's doing them favors, like they're telling him, you know, mob shit favors, you know. But they're paying him in homemade wine. So we walked out of one guy's yard one day, and I told my father, why aren't we taking money off these guys? Why are we taking wine off them? And he looked at me and he goes, why? He goes, this is like their blood. They're giving me their blood. This is means more to them than money. This is their blood. He told me. I said, all right, whoa. You know, that was like, whoa, all right. I said, okay. That was their blood.
And how about the Gotti movie, Anthony Quinn? How do you think he played him?
You know, it was all right. I mean, I saw he actually was hanging out at the Ravenite, Anthony Quinn, when he was filming that. I don't know. Them movies are so much bullshit. I mean, you know, he did all right. He did all right. But it's hard for me to watch movies about, because like I know them. Like the only movie where I actually knew the people that was really any good was Goodfellas. These other Gotti movies, they suck. I mean, you know, like some of it's real, some of it's not. You know, did he tell John about when they wanted Neil to be the boss? That was all true. You know, about the drugs, that was all true. About the tapes, that Paul wanted the tapes. You know, so there was a lot of truth to it. But you know, he's a great actor, Anthony Quinn. He did a good job. Neil was very quiet. Neil was very. He was very reserved. Very, you know, good posture, tall, always had a nice suit on, tall, you know, had like bright eyes, always sat in the Ravenite, never really walked around the Ravenite except when it was time to leave. He would walk through and say goodbye, kiss us all goodbye and leave. And then once he left, then we would all leave most of the time. But he stood in the back most of the time at a table. When he died, John redid the whole place and sort of petitioned off the table where Neil used to sit at, and John started sitting there. Yeah, he was very, you know, he was very stern. Like that's a good word to use.